are broadcasting live. I want to say good afternoon and thank you to everyone who's taken the time out of their day to join us for our first ever Florida Legislative Power Hours. We want to say thank you all for joining us. We have a packed agenda and we're going to try to model some best practices for you all out there. So very quickly, I am going to share my screen and pop up with you all our agenda for today. And you're going to take a big deep breath because we have an action-packed hour for us. So we've already jumped right in. We're going to go through very quickly our welcome and our purpose for today. And then we're just going to hit the ground running. So we have with us today John Boyd, who's going to talk to us about how to find what bills are out there and how do we track those progress of the bills. Then we're going to head over to Myra Simpson. She's going to talk to us about how do we identify our legislators, as well as online resources through NACAC and SACAC. After that, we'll be followed by Mike Rose, and he's going to give us some perspective from NACAC and SACAC, specifically with some of our legislative priorities that are happening here in Florida. And then we're going to look at some insights from different experts out there in the field. So we have Federico Glitman, who's joining us from Lynn University. He's going to give us some insights from our higher ed friends. And then we're going to pass it back over to John and Myra, who are going to give us some perspectives from the K-12 side. Then, of course, we'll have some talking points about how do we appropriately advocate for legislation, whether we're for or against. And then we'll close out the day with any questions and, of course, talking about SACAC membership, which will be led by our wonderful SACAC Government Relations Chair, Jessica Sant. So I've kind of given you a brief introduction to all of our guest speakers, but before we go any further into our agenda, I'm actually going to stop sharing my screen and we're going to go back to our panelists. I'm going to give each of our panelists the opportunity to introduce themselves. So I guess we'll start with Mr. Boyd. We'll start with you and then run through.
Sure, I'll be happy to. I just want to welcome everybody and thank you for the opportunity to be part of today. I'm the Director of Government and Labor Relations here in Osceola County. Among my duties are to monitor legislation that affects our policy and procedures in the school district. And I'll share with you today, per the agenda, some tools to hopefully make it easier for you.
Awesome, thanks. And how about we'll pass it over to Federico.
All right, hi everyone, how are you? Definitely excited to be here. Definitely an interesting time to be in Florida, be part of SACAC, be part of our community. Definitely some interesting bills we're going to talk about, but hopefully we'll be able to educate the whole team a little bit better tonight.
Awesome. Thanks for joining us. And now we'll pass it over, let's see, to Michael Rose.
Hey, I'm Michael Rose, Director of Government Relations at NACAC. With me is Liz Glacier, who helps me out here. I basically head up the lobbying for NACAC, both on the federal and state level. So thank you for joining us today.
Awesome. Thanks, Mike. And then Myra.
Hi, I'm Myra Simpson. I'm the Director of College Counseling at Oak Hall School in Gainesville, Florida. I'm new to both my school and to SACAC this year. And, and I've been getting involved in government relations both at SACAC, and I recently attended the NACAC Legislative Conference last month. So glad to be here, glad to share insights about how to get involved and also how to advocate effectively your legislators.
All right, Myra, thanks for joining us. And last but definitely not least, Jessica.
Hi everyone, my name is Jessica Sant. I'm the Director of College Counseling at the Lovett School in Atlanta, Georgia. And like Amanda said, I'm one of the Government Relations co-chairs for SACAC. Thanks for being here today.
Yeah, thanks, Jessica. All right, so just very quickly before we kick it off with Mr. Boyd, our objectives for today. So we really have two main objectives. One is by the time we get done with our webinar today, we want all of our participants to be able to identify their legislators. So that was one of the main selling points of our webinar today, was that if you couldn't name a legislator, then this is a webinar that you needed to be on. So that's one of our goals. A second goal for you is to be able to identify at least one bill that is important to you. It may be important to you on a personal level, it may be important to you on a professional level, but we at least want you to be able to identify one bill that is important to you, and then to be able to track that bill. I guess I really lied when I said we have 2 goals. I really have 3 goals for you. The third goal is really to be able to know what to do if you want to advocate for a bill, whether you're advocating for or against a bill, to be able to know how to do that appropriately and to be able to advocate to the point where you can get some actionable change happening. So those are our objectives for today. We're going to kick it right off with Mr. Boyd. So Mr. Boyd, take it away and give us some information about how do we find what bills are being filed?
Sure. Well, I think the best way to start would be to make certain you had a copy of the calendar of the legislative body that you are going to monitor. And in Florida, of course, we have the House and the Senate and a bicameral legislature. And there is a calendar, and it's already in session, and we know that it will last for 60 days, and it'll end usually the first week of May, unless it's a special year where they have a schedule that begins in January. They call the last day of the session sine die, without a day is the Latin. And what that means is ceremoniously they end the session by the sergeant of arms for both chambers dropping handkerchiefs, just as a tidbit. Now, since we're in the middle of the session, how do you find the bills and track them? There's a number of organizations that actually have tools to help you do exactly that. One of the things that I do, I kind of refer to as more of a hatchet versus a scalpel. I create an Excel spreadsheet that tracks all the bills important to me. You may be thinking, I don't have time to do that, and you're right. That's partly what my job is for the district. So I have the time as part of my job, or I have to make the time. So for you, you can go to a website called Online Sunshine if you're tracking and monitoring bills in Florida that are filed. When you get to that site, you'll see a link for a tracking tool. It's actually a free subscription for anyone all over the world that wants to track and monitor the legislation that has been filed and that is being heard in committee in Florida. So once you subscribe to that, it actually lets you go into a list of bills, and you can just check off the ones that are important to you. It's not for the faint of heart in Florida this session. There's 3,000 bills that have been filed. So what I would suggest is that you rely on state organizations and national organizations that will focus for you and their legislative updates specific bills that have topics or that address topics important to you or have components of it that affect your job or your students or your school districts. So what I do is I go to the tracking website, and at the very bottom of that website, you'll see a link for something that allows you to export a text file that's comma delimited. And I take that and I create an Excel spreadsheet, and I actually go in and use pivot tables. And so what I'm getting at to is if you would like to receive this spreadsheet, just send your email to me, email address to Ms. Lopez or myself, and I'll make certain that I add you to my subscription list, and then you'll get it too. I don't usually send it more than 2 weeks, every 2 weeks during session, because I have to go through and digest the bills. And it's not really that kind of reading that, well, let's just put it this way. If you have insomnia, it's terrific. What I would suggest, though, is to rely on your organizations for the focus on the bills that are most important to you. And that's what we'll be getting to in the other portions of this webinar today. Other tools that I would bring up for your edification, if you will, is the handouts that will be provided to you include how does a bill become a law in Florida? A lot of times you hear that a bill has passed. Well, has it passed committee or has it passed the chamber? If it passes the chamber, you know, that means it's gone through a committee process. If you want to kill a bill in Florida, you assign it to multiple committees. And that's the case with, for example, there's one bill related to teacher unions, well, actually all unions in Florida, that would require an automatic decertification if they have less than 50% of their members of the bargaining unit as members. So that is, there is a bill related to it that's filed in the opposing chamber, but it's been assigned to multiple, at last count, 4 committees. So what that means is it has to be heard by all 4 of those committees and pass favorably before it even gets to that chamber floor for a vote. And then a bill has to be, of course, approved in both chambers. And then after that, it goes either to conference committee if there's any differences in language in the versions of the bills in each chamber that have been passed. And then even after it goes out of conference committee, it has to get the governor's signature. So where I'm going with that is that in Florida, you have roughly about a 15% chance of any bill becoming law because you have to go through that meat grinder process. And that's how we refer to how the sausage is made. Everybody likes sausage. Well, not everybody if you're vegetarian, but those that do like sausage certainly don't like to watch the process. So now you know. And with that, I'll pause.
Okay, great. All right, so just a couple of things that came up as you were speaking. So real quick, we're gonna pop up over, we're gonna pop up on the screen the online sunshine so that everyone on the webinar can actually see what the website looks like. And maybe you, for those of you who are participating in the webinar, maybe screenshot this or take a picture of it real quick or write it down, which leads me to my next point. We had a question come up as you were speaking about, are there going to be handouts or can we have access to any of the resources that we're going to be discussing today? The answer is, of course, yes. So we actually have a whole bunch of resources along with this webinar that will be up and available on the SACAC website after today's webinar. So everyone out there, just know if you're feverishly taking notes, you don't necessarily have to, because all these resources will be up and available for you afterwards. So Mr. Boyd, thank you so much. That was exactly what we were looking for. So since you've shared the online sunshine with us, now what we're going to do is have Myra talk about the specific tools with NACAC and SACAC that are very similar in helping us identify legislators and start looking at bills that we might possibly be interested in. So Myra, take it away for us.
Great. Well, thank you so much. And so I want to, during my time here, I wanted to point out tools and resources that are available for members to use in terms of legislative advocacy. So I'm going to share some resources. First, the NACAC website. It's from the National Association of College Admissions Counseling. So NACAC has a great resource here. Let's see. I'm going to share my screen here. So here we are at the NACAC Legislative Center, and every member of NACAC is able to get legislative updates from NACAC. So it's a monthly email that's sent to all NACAC members with updates about issues and topics and legislation that that NACAC is supporting and advocating for, things that members should be aware of. But also, if you are looking to see who your legislators are, if there's a bill that's being voted on regarding college access, and you want to know who exactly are your state legislators, who are your state representatives in Congress, and also in, your 2 state senators. What you can do is on this screen here, as you can see, if you pull up your zip code, you can go to pull up your zip code and it'll pull up who exactly are your legislative representatives. So in our area, so I'll just use my own zip code as an example, and it'll pull up. If I put in my own zip code, it would pull up, who are my 2 state senators, who's my local congressional representative. So that way, I could, and that would give you the contact information, so I could reach out to those offices and regarding advocacy. Also, on here, this website, you could also sign up and subscribe to Legislative Action emails, so that way you can get updates on a monthly basis about legislative action and NACAC's legislative priorities. NACAC also each year sponsors a legislative program in March. And that's for any member of NACAC who is interested in lobbying and supporting higher ed and legislation. So that's a great program for net members who have interest in this to come to Washington, meet with NACAC leaders, and get prepared for going for Hill visits and meeting with staff members of your congressional representative and also your state, your senatorial members. I also wanted to point out share the SACAC website. So we're on SACAC is a multi-state affiliate, over 1,600 members, and we have an affiliate government relations committee. And so if you were to go to the SACAC page, you would see our 2 current chairs, or our panelist is one of our current chairs of government relations for SACAC. And because SACAC is a multi-state affiliate, each state has a contact person for legislative concerns for their particular state. So if you, depending on which state you're a member in, you can see, you know, who is your contact person. If you're interested in finding out about legislative specifics regarding your particular state, or interested in getting involved and potentially finding out ways that you could get involved and lobby for legislation that impacts your particular state. And then each of the affiliates, a lot of them have been, in the last couple of years, have been sponsoring and offering specific legislative days. So as I mentioned, NACAC has a legislative day in March. Affiliates also can do legislative days at their state capital. So if we go to this page here, and we can see the legislative days. Here's some of the examples of legislative days that states within the SACAC affiliate have had during this calendar year. So these are things that are organized by members, typically members of the state government relations committee, and it's a way for them to have their members involved in legislative action at the state level. So these are resources, again, that are available for members. If you're interested in volunteering for your legislative day, you can. There's a link where you can put your get your name, put your name there, and your information will be forwarded to the government relations contact, so that you can be involved and get involved in being an advocate for your particular state. So that's all I have, and certainly we'll talk a little more about these things that we discussed later on. But I'll turn this back to Amanda. Thank you for letting me be involved.
Yeah, thanks so much, Myra. And you know what? It was a perfect segue. So I realized as Myra was speaking, I didn't really introduce myself. So my name is Amanda Lopez, and I am very recently have agreed to work alongside Myra and serve as the Florida chair for the legislative days here in Florida, which is why we're putting on our Florida Legislative Power Hour. So as Myra just showed, there is a way that you can sign up to show interest to participate in legislative days. And one of the things that we're looking at doing is building 3 Florida committees, one for the North, one for the Central, and then one for the South of the state, that we could all work in conjunction and help organize not only online events like today's, but to also build up to in-person events where maybe we visit local government or travel up to Tallahassee to do some advocating. So putting that out there. So if you are interested, as we wrap up today's session, we'll be sharing all of our contact information. So if you are interested in kind of dipping your toe into the government relations world, I highly encourage you to please reach out to Myra or myself or anyone on today's webinar. So with that little PA announcement for joining SACAC and getting involved in our government relations activities, we're going to pass along to government relations guru himself, Mike Rose, Director for Government Relations with NACAC. So Mike, help us understand NACAC pillars and kind of what's happening, bring us back down to kind of what's happening in Florida and the viewpoint of NACAC and SACAC.
Sure. So again, Michael Rose, working at NACAC. Traditionally, we have had 3 pillars of our advocacy work: access to counseling, need-based financial aid, and rigorous curriculum. On the first one, obviously, we're all here to support our students and provide post-secondary counseling. So we want to make sure that students, regardless of their background or regardless of the school that they're in, have access to counseling. We will support rigorous curriculum. We want to make sure that students are ready for college or the post-secondary institution that they decide to attend. A lot of times I get asked, does that mean that we support Common Core? Not necessarily. We don't define what rigorous curriculum is. Instead, we want to make sure that students have access to difficult or strong classes that are going to prepare them for life after high school. And then need-based financial aid. We want to make sure that students are able to afford to attend the school of their choice, whether that's a 2-year, 4-year, public, private, whatnot. So we want to make sure that need-based financial aid is available to all students. over the last maybe 10 to 15 years, we've started adding in a handful of other public policy positions. I think that probably the earliest deviation from the three-legged stool that I mentioned was support of the DREAM Act. We were one of the first education organizations to support the DREAM Act, which, as I hopefully know, allows students or individuals that were brought from a different country into the U.S. Early in their lives and meet certain criteria to live legally in the United States and attend school and continue their education. We've supported that since the early 2000s when the bill and the concept was first introduced, and we've been strong proponents of that over the years. We also have added what we call the Student Protection Agenda. This agenda is largely relating to for-profit colleges and unscrupulous colleges that really have unethical ways of recruiting students and also usually have poor outcomes for these students. So we want to make sure that if a student makes a decision to attend a college, that they're going to a school that they're going to succeed in, they're not going to take on an unreasonable amount of debt, they have reasonable job placement prospects, and are otherwise going to be, in more or less good hands. We, as an organization, we're not fundamentally opposed to for-profit colleges. However, NACAC and our affiliates were established to ensure the integrity of the student recruitment process. And because of the tactics that these institutions use, and they're not willing to sign on to the SPGP, that we're not allowing them to become members of NACAC. So that's a pretty big part of my workload when I'm up here, actually also in the States, but certainly in DC. We also have expanded into non-traditional students. Some of that is LGBT community, minority students, students from non-traditional backgrounds that, they deserve a quality education just like every other student. And so throughout their life, both the K-12 student as well as a college student, we want to make sure that they have a safe and safe learning environment and are able to pursue their studies as they see fit and have access to the counseling that we provide and all the other resources that we can go. So, again, our main pillars are those three items, but based on our SPGP, as well as a lot of the work and the interest of our members, we've expanded those legislative priorities over the last few years, and we go from there. And by and large, our ultimate goal is to make sure that students have access to a post-secondary degree and can afford it. And so that really drives our mission quite a bit. So I believe that you've been sent a handful of bills that we've identified that are pending in the Florida legislature that we recommended positions on. As one of the previous speakers mentioned, there's over 3,000 bills that have been introduced. We boiled it down to just a handful to make it a little bit more manageable. That's not to say that other bills won't be introduced later on, or an amendment to some of these bills may be offered, but these are the ones that we felt as educators you should be aware of. The first one that we wanted to highlight is the Florida Excellence in Higher Education Act. And this bill, which I guess is getting pulled up for you right now, is relates to the need-based financial aid that I referred to earlier. So, there's a lot of good programs down in Florida, but we want to make sure that these are well-funded and protected from any sort of budget cuts or anything like that. The disclosure statement actually relates to the for-profit work that I mentioned. These disclosures are intended to make sure that students really fully understand the accreditation, the quality of study at a particular college, what the charges are, not just tuition, but other fees that are associated with enrolling an institution. We feel that better disclosure, more information for students is best. There may be a little bit of a burden on an institution to create these fact sheets or these disclosures. However, we feel that the benefit far outweighs the negatives. One, the student is protected. He or she is able to pursue their degree and hopefully graduate and become productive members of society. But on the flip side of that is making sure that taxpayers, whether it be state or federal taxpayers, are protected. We fund a lot of grants and loans for students. When I say we, taxpayers fund a lot of these programs, and taxpayers' dollars should be carefully used, and we don't want them to be used at colleges that are just going to essentially pocket that funding and not worry about whether that student is supported or takes classes and graduates from college. The next step, we urge or recommend opposing. And basically, this bill relates to the DREAM Act work that we've done over the years. This would require public institutions to charge out-of-state fees for undocumented students that are attending their institution. A lot of times these students have lived in Florida or a particular state and know no other community. And so they've been educated there, they paid a lot of taxes there, and they should be able to benefit from in-state tuition. So we would oppose this bill, which would charge out-of-state tuition for certain students. And then these last two bills, excuse me, were just more to kind of FYI. We thought that you might be interested in as educators. The first one, it does relate to whether or not a student graduates, but we didn't feel that it goes to our core mission enough to really say we should support or oppose it. But it is something that, especially the high school counselors out there, need to be aware of. And then the College Competitiveness Act, again, that's just an FYI to make sure that you're aware of some of the potential changes that could be going on to the college system down in Florida. So with that, happy to answer some questions, or we can move along.
All right. I don't have any questions coming through at the moment, but Mike, I have to say thank you so much for that comprehensive look. And I really appreciate how you have structured these specific bills as something either to support or oppose or being neutral from NACAC pillars. So thank you so much. And thank you so much for the information.
Sorry, I might just add that on NACAC's website that we pulled up earlier, we do have fact sheets on each of our policy positions. So if people want to look over them, get familiar with our issues, they kind of give you some bullet points to use when you're talking to your elected officials.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that. Okay, so now that we've kind of looked at broader view from NACAC and SACAC standpoint, we're going to start funneling it down, and we're going to hear just kind of perspective and insights from both higher ed and from our K-12 partners. So I'm going to pass it over to Federico at Lynn University to give us some insights specifically on private higher ed side. So Freddie, take it away.
Sure. So it's such an interesting time right now to be in our profession, especially with the brand new POTUS that we have on staff, especially with the new Secretary of Education. Too many trends and such a unique demographic shift. I mean, the first one to really focus on is our Secretary of Education. Fortunately for here in Florida, first component she ever did was go visit FIU, which is really a staple institution within the state of Florida. Reaches various demographics, various types of students, ethnicities. So that is one positive thing that we've been able to see, that she's been able to really go out there and try to focus on what's occurring right now in today's education. But it's, again, such an interesting time. I mean, just less than 12 hours ago, she decided to withdraw the Obama-era Student Loan Protection Act, which really, going a little bit more in depth, it comes down to the correlation of the student loan protection as well with the idea of the for-profit schools. As Mike mentioned prior in the communication, it's essential that these institutions do sign that document regarding certain practices and components. But even that's just the micro component. But looking at the macro, really before we can see which bills can be resourceful and which ones we should bring in, I think Florida is really going to be one of those markets in the next 15, 20 years that are really going to impact the way that education is going to be occurring all over the United States. To give you the best idea of the shifts in demographics, statistics show that there's going to be a lower graduation rate in the Northeast, and more graduation rates are going to be increasing in the Southeast. However, though, the majority of the students with the increased high school graduation rate are really going to be first-generation students, low income, different ethnicities. It's no longer going to be, as Jeff Salingo mentioned, quote-unquote, the stereotypical one race. To give you a better idea about Florida, in 2012 to 2013, Florida produced over 176,000 high school graduates. It's projected that by the year 2025 and 2026, Florida is actually going to produce over 193,000 high school graduates, which is an increase of 17,000. On the higher education side, one of the unique laws that just occurred is prior. Went through a few of the rules and regulations, really didn't see any bills too enacted within it. I can tell you on the higher education side, still being relatively new, we're still trying to see how institutions are changing their scholarship models, maybe changing scholarship deadlines, maybe criteria. So that's one component we definitely need to keep an eye out on, is the prior changes. Potentially, with all these shifts in demographics and the high school graduation rates, maybe May 1st in 10, 15 years no longer exists, and it really becomes April 1st, or it becomes sooner. It's really going to be dependent on the different 4,500 institutions right now in the United States. But let alone in Florida right now, we're just undergoing such a unique plethora of ideas, of mechanisms. Down south, there's a potential merger that's going to be occurring in the next couple of years, just as long as many institutions right now are going through financial difficulties. You look at the Sweetbriars, the Downings all over the United States, it's really keeping up with what's going on with legislation and as well as education. What's interesting is, again, going even the last 48, 72 hours, you got SUNY over in New York that if a family has an EFC of $100,000 or below, guaranteed full tuition, and that the University of Houston just announced recently that if a family has a gross income that doesn't exceed $45,000, they're guaranteed full tuition and mandatory fees to new incoming freshmen. With the one in New York, it's really interesting. One of the quotes that really stood out is, after they graduate, recipients must live and work in New York for the same number of years as they receive the money. Otherwise, the scholarship does convert to a loan. And as what Mike mentioned, it's really about the integrity of the institution, making sure these students aren't leaving $200,000 in debt. And I kind of feel that I took a lot of Mike's talking points in this situation as well. But could essentially what's happening in New York happen in Florida in the next couple of years? As Mike mentioned with this Bill 374, they really want to rename the Florida college system as the Florida Community College System. Definitely gives you that opportunity, the 2+2 gateway. However, though, if we begin to move into that direction, could what's occurring in New York, could that potentially occur in Florida? So it's definitely important to keep a strong eye on that bill, speak with our representatives. If we believe that's a good route, push on our end. Otherwise, we do need to see the positive and negatives, again, of what's occurring. And as Mike mentioned again, even the State Bill 82 and having these schools focus on undocumented students as out of state, how are we really helping the type of student that's coming? As the demographics demonstrated, in the next couple of years, it's going to be low income, first generation students. So are we essentially helping students if we're going to start charging them out of state fees, even though they're undocumented? And we supported the DREAM Act and the DACA as well before. But it just doesn't solely come down to what's occurring in New York, but it's really what's coming down to the quality and the core of education. Two unique bills are really going to be 926 and 392. 926, to really summarize it, it deals with making a national assessment of students about to enter college instead of just using the Florida standard assessment. Higher education is coming to a certain standstill on, is it beneficial to have the first 2 years of general education courses rather than begin their major, rather than focus on financial literacy, rather than focus on certain critical thinking skills, certain collaborative work. Even some institutions are looking at their core curriculum right now and planning to change it. And these are institutions that have 200 years of just their core values. But with 392, and really dealing with the next generation Sunshine State standards, one of the unique components is that they really want to change the mathematical literacy into personal finance literacy. It's great that we're focusing on students with the English, math, sciences, that core curriculum to really build that foundation for them to any asset. But we still need to teach our students how to manage a checkbook, how to mortgage a house, finance a car, what an interest rate is. With the cost of education increasing, they must be aware of what the interest rate is for a student loan. When can they start paying it back? those are certain components that really need to be embedded within that high school curriculum to help our students become successful once they get into the higher education level. And on private and public institution sides, it's really a good opportunity for us to look into our mission, look into our vision, and see how are we assisting students with the new demographics, the new changes, the new ideology. Going as well as what Mike said with student loan and debt, there's really 3 unique ones that we need to focus on, which is 396, 795, and 867. 396 and 867 are really correlated to defining what a student loan is. And at the same time, it's also providing colleges the opportunity to give these students more information without any sort of liability. On our end, it does come down to an ethical standpoint. We really need to ensure that these students understand their financial obligation, which is why being able to promote the bill prior about having that financial literacy is really going to help, not just short-term, but long-term. And then the final one, which was just brought up recently, is 795, which is creating that student loan forgiveness program, but making sure it's not taxable income. But at the end of the day, really what it comes down to, it's right now we need to see what's going to be happening with New York, potentially with the university that I mentioned prior, which is Houston, and really seeing the financial literacy behind these bills and looking at the demographics and shifts. If there's any questions, I'd be definitely more than happy to help out. I'm over at Lynn University.
Awesome. All right, Freddie. So much information, but it's great information. And depending on, I appreciate that you were speaking specifically at one point about what's happening in South Florida, because even within our own state, it seems like there's such different things that are happening depending on whether you're in the Panhandle or whether you're down where you are in Boca. So it's definitely a spectrum across our state. And I really appreciate that you were giving us the insight from a private higher ed perspective. I know from K-12, we kind of tend to sometimes be in our own world. And then when I start talking to people about, well, do you want to be called a community college again? You know, I have my own beliefs, but then hearing it from other colleagues at other levels, it's definitely something that we need to make sure that we're taking the time to do before we start advocating, is to educate ourselves, which sometimes I'm not sure we always have enough time or resources to do so. So I really appreciate your time today, Freddie. Thank you so much. So to kind of contrast Freddie's information, we're going to kick it over back to Mr. Boyd and Myra Simpson to give us some perspectives from the K-12 side of things. What's interesting with this duo is that Mr. Boyd is representing public K-12, and then Myra is private K-12. So we might have some similarities, but we also might have some differences, but we're all in this together. So I'll pass it over to you guys.
All righty. Well, Myra, would you like to go first?
Oh yeah, go ahead. Go ahead. Or John, did you want to go? Well, I guess I'll go first. So I'm new to my school. This is my first year at Oak Hall and new to Florida. But so in the last couple months, I've been learning about kind of a higher ed, K through 12, in the context of being an independent school. Oak Hall is a independent school, about 800 students in Gainesville. We're across town from the University of Florida. We serve a population that is very diverse. We certainly have students who come from the immediate area, but we also have students who come from other towns and counties within our region. We also have a growing population of international students. We have students who are coming primarily from China, but also we have students coming from other regions of the world. So that's been interesting, as well as working with the population, both domestic and also international. But I will say, just from and I've had a chance to interact with counterparts from other schools. I would say in this area, Oak Hall is kind of unique in that we are a private independent school where we're surrounded and primarily of other secondary schools which are public. So a lot of the school are my counterparts will work in public school environments. And I would say the things that from the K-12 perspective that or things I've noted is certainly counselor access. We've talked about this before, that counselor access is certainly an area that SACAC and also NACAC are focusing on. Within the state of Florida, the ratio of counselor to student is about 450. The recommended, the national ratio, I believe, based on the most recent data that was available, is 1 to 482. And the recommended ratio from the Association of School Counselors is about 1 to 250. So certainly that ratio, and that makes a big difference in terms of a student's access to quality college counseling. If they are, one of many students that a school counselor needs to see, they may not have the time and the resources to focus on college counseling because of all the other responsibilities and roles that a school counselor has within a public school environment. So certainly that's an area in terms of legislative focus, both on the state level and national level. Encouraging our legislators to put forth resources and funding to support students having access to quality college counseling, because NACAC has provided much detail and data about how the access to quality counseling, how much that makes an impact in terms of a student's college options and access. The other thing I would share is that certainly affordability is another thing that I'm noticing. Even primarily, I work with a population that there are families of means, but there also is a very high population of students who are on financial aid, and they will likely need significant financial aid when they go off to support their college education. So what I'm seeing is more common, especially this year with all the financial aid changes that Federico mentioned the prior year. Both of the state universities, in the two flagship state universities, FSU and UF, altered their financial aid deadlines this year because of the prior year. And so in past years where students would submit their information post January 1st, both of the schools had December deadlines. So that meant families had to be more proactive in getting their information in an earlier time frame. And I think schools also now, instead of in the past years, if they would have a financial aid information program for families, maybe that would take place in November, December. I'm thinking that's taking place now earlier, instead of waiting until senior year. Schools are, if they're having financial aid programs to provide information for their students, they're happening in the junior year, so that way families can know exactly the time frame, and then October 1st, when the FAFSA opens, they're able to get that information and get working on that so they can meet these deadlines. Yeah. And then last thing is with international students. I mean, I've seen a growing number. As I said, I've been at Oak Hall for a short amount of time, but I've been talking with my colleagues who work in admissions here at Oak Hall. We do recruit students from overseas. We have students from overseas, and I see a large group of students and a growing number of students who are coming from the school from China, South America, other areas of the world. And one of the things that I'm seeing is that students when they come here, we certainly they go through an application process. English proficiency has to be established. But when they're going to college, certainly looking at being able to find places, or financially that they can afford the cost of education, two, that are the right match. Certainly one of the concerns this year has been the travel restrictions that were implemented earlier this year. And certainly if for independent schools in the U.S., I mean, some colleges are also worried about this, but certainly independent schools, particularly boarding schools that do get students from overseas, that might be a concern whether or not, if that pipeline of students coming from outside of the country that want to pursue secondary education in the U.S., that, if there's restrictions on who can come into our country, that could affect who the population of students that are able to apply for secondary education in an independent school. So certainly we're looking, as a school, we're looking at that because, that we do have a growing number of international students. We see that as a value, something we value, something that the school believes brings a diversity, other benefits to the high school. So something that we're certainly paying attention to.
Awesome. All right. So to counter that, or maybe to complement that, Mr. Boyd, from the public perspective.
Certainly. One of the things that she mentioned that I know is a very important issue for guidance counselors is the ratio of guidance counselors to students. And I'm going to cast this in a matrix or a context of specific to Florida. And that is that the budget picture for the coming years is looking bleak because of a disconnect between revenues and expenditures. The House Speaker, Corcoran, would state that we have a spending problem in the state of Florida, not a revenues problem. But at the same token, we continually see revenues either earmarked or taken away from the public schools in the state of Florida. Namely, we're looking at in this session a division of existing capital dollars, which would be used for building schools, being shared with charter schools. What's important about that is a lot of school district budgets transfer monies from their capital fund to their operational fund in order to pay for, of course, operational costs. What that means is employees, because they're the largest expense for any school district. While I say that, I want to add that in this particular situation, relationships become key, and how you build them is part of this webinar. I want to share my screen with something to highlight a few tools, and one would be, in particular, this one. And this is, when I referred to the tracking user guide before, you'll receive this as a handout, but this is what it looks like. And then moving from that, there's another handout, and it's the one called Do's and Don'ts with Congressional Staffers, but they apply also to any of the interactions you would have with staff for a state legislator. And don't discount the staff if you can't meet with the state legislator themselves. The staff sometimes are just as influential and oftentimes help write some of the legislation that the legislators in turn will present in the legislative session. That is also a handout that's a tool for you. And then last but not least, a handout that I'd make available is something called How to Lobby Your Decision Makers for Osceola Public Schools, but this isn't just about Osceola. I'm providing that as a handout that you could use for your own school district as a model. It's not perfect, but what I've done is I've identified those who are part of the legislative delegation for our school district, identified them by including a picture in the document and also their contact information. And that leads me to, back on topic, what we have been talking about in terms of the legislative session bills, and Bill 926 is one that I would urge those of our fellow educators to support. And not just that bill, but the key here is the companion bill in the House is 773, but it doesn't have the positive amendments that were added to that bill by some of our advocates in the legislature, specifically in regards to testing. And why that matters to a guidance counselor is how many of you become the school testing coordinator. And it's an additional duty that you have with that. And this bill would actually limit it in that it would discontinue some of the end-of-course exams. It would also make the value-added model an optional piece for teacher evaluation. Student growth would stay, but using the VAM for that purpose, if this bill is passed in both houses and signed by the governor, will actually be optional. So I know that matters because the testing is so high stakes and it's pressureful, or pardon the word, but it's high pressure. And you, as the guidance counselor, are always asked to assist with that process. And in turn, this is actually used in your evaluation as an instructional employee in a lot of the school districts. So that's the state perspective that I would offer. I would look at Senate Bill 926 to advocate, and its companion 773, but contact your House representatives to make certain that they add the Senator Monford amendments from the Senate bill, at least the language of it, to the House bill in the appropriate committee to make certain that it passes in a fashion that's favorable to us all as educators in K-12.
And one thing I just wanted to correct something I mentioned. I mentioned the ratio, the ratios I was referring to for counselor to student is derived from the most recent data that the American School Counselor Association for Florida. It's actually 1 to 491, so still very high. The national ratio is again 1 to 42 in terms of number of counselors per student in the high school.
Yeah, and you know, if you were hanging in there with us as a school counselor 3 or 4 years ago, you know, we've seen multiple bills that have tried to address the issue of counselor to student ratio, and they were cut down so much that all we got passed through was our named school counselors. So, you know, we don't have a bill this year that is similar to what has been filed in years previous to this, but even just the idea of how could we, as John said, how can we build those relationships and how can we advocate for that, maybe through a different realm. So the idea of fully funding ESSA is something that, you know, it hasn't come up today, and I feel like that's a webinar all on its own. But, you know, I want to encourage our participants that although we're talking specifically about certain bills today, those are bills that came up as talking points as we all started looking at hosting this webinar. There are many more. As John said, how many? 3,000?
It's over 3,000 at this count. I can get you, well, actually in my update, you can get the specific number, but since I did the update, they may have filed additional bills. The session's not over until the first week of May, and they could file bills up until that time.
Yeah, good. So, okay, so there you go. So again, we encourage you when we finish this webinar to make sure to go to SACAC's website, check out the resources, and whether you are tracking bills or following bills through the SACAC tools and or the Florida.gov tools, but make sure that you're finding legislation that is important to you and that you are advocating for them, which leads us beautifully to our next speaker. We're going to kick it back to Mr. Mike Rose, and he's going to talk to us because this is his wheelhouse. He's going to talk to us about how do we appropriately advocate for bills. So, Mike.
Sure, thanks. So I think the first thing I want to stress is that elected officials are people like you and me. They just happen to hold a position in the House or the Senate, in this case in Florida. But they are here to learn from you. They're here to try and improve their communities. So they look to us for a better understanding of what's happening in their communities, what's happening in the schools, and both by schools, I mean K-12 as well as higher ed. So they really want to learn from you and become better versed in some of the issues that we're working on, and therefore we're really viewed as experts in our field. So when we go into an office, we really want to go in, explain first. Also, really want to stress that we're representing SACAC and not your institution. There's a lot of layers to a college or a school district or whatnot, and you may not be authorized to speak as a representative of the school district or the college, but you're very much empowered to speak either as an individual or as a member of SACAC or NACAC or whatever the case may be. So come in, talk about SACAC, what we do, what our members are, and then explain to the staffer or the member of the State House what the issue is, and whether it's the counselor-to-student ratio. Say, hey, I'm really concerned about the ratio in my school. It's 700 to 1, and I'm not able to give quality time to any of my students because of that ratio. And if you support Bill X, Y, and Z, that will help the ratio, help me do my job better, and students will benefit. So you want to talk about the positives of what a piece of legislation will do. Obviously, on the flip side of that, there may be a bill that would do a lot of damage to what we're trying to accomplish. So if that's the case, you might want to pull out one or two examples about why that bill was problematic. I think you want to be polite at all times and remain calm. I met with a lot of members of Congress that have just infuriated me, but you got to be professional. You got to present your argument and let the chips fall where they may. Not everyone's going to agree with you all the time. So just lay out your argument and see what happens. If a dialogue ensues, that's great. That's what we want. And we want to continue to be a resource to individuals. And then I think lastly, just be a resource. So whether that bill moves or not, let the staffer or the legislator know that you're available to answer questions about how a bill or an amendment or a budget cut might impact students' access to college or to a community college. We have a lot of resources. We work with international students, as was mentioned. We work with undocumented students. We work with, you name it, we work with every type of student out there. And we can let them know how different policy positions are going to impact these students. And actually, maybe one last thing, even though I already said lastly, invite them to a college fair or invite them to your campus and let them see the work that you do on a daily basis. I'm always amazed that members of Congress have no idea that 500 colleges and 10,000 students showed up in Miami or in New York City for one of our college fairs, and that's their constituents. They want to learn about that kind of stuff. They want to engage with either the students or the parents or whatnot. So it's a two-way street. We want to be a resource to them about legislation, and then we want to be able to help connect them with students and families that are trying to pursue and improve their lives.
Yeah, great. And I have to just very quickly tell a quick personal story. I am very, very brand new into this whole world. And I'm really, when I say dipping my toe and like I'm as green as Kermit the Frog, I'm so new at all of this. But I had the opportunity to attend the Day on the Hill with NACAC. So like I didn't even, get warmed up by visiting my local government or even going up to my state legislators. I went directly and started off in DC with Mike Rose and Myra. And they were great coaches. And, another piece of advice that I would throw out there is do your research and understand what prior legislation have these senators and representatives, have they supported and have they not supported? Because you may be able to find common ground, not necessarily by going directly for what you are advocating for, but by going around and finding something that they've advocated for in the past and that they've supported in the past, and being able to backtrack it to what you're up there advocating for. So I would definitely say if there was one thing that I really learned from my very first experience of going up and meeting with my legislatures, it was to do my research and to start out by either thanking them for, how they've supported education in the past, or at least thanking them for supporting something that in some way positively impacted education. And that at least got us, got the ball rolling and got us off to a nice start to be able to get some meaty conversation. Go ahead, Mike.
Sorry, I would add maybe two more things. One is read their bio. We had a member in DC when they were up in DC who was about to meet with one of I think it was a House member, and he has 16-year-old triplets. I mean, you couldn't ask for a better audience than that. He was getting ready to start the college process and learning about all these different things. And if you didn't read the bio or understand that he went to the same college that you went to or whatnot, those are opportunities to get familiar ground and get on the right foot. So knowing a little bit about who your audience is, if you're going to talk to staff, they might have just graduated from your institution 2 or 3 years ago. Capitol Hill is full of 20-year-olds, so you never know who you're going to bump into. In fact, we hear all the time about, I counseled that student when he was at my high school, or she was a student of mine, and I can't believe how far she's gone. And then the last thing I would say, DC is awesome, come up here, but you can do a lot of these visits in their district offices, or you don't have to go to Tallahassee. You can go to their district offices in Florida. You don't necessarily have to hop on the plane to be advocates. You can do it on your lunch break or hopping down the road in your car and meeting at their local office.
Yep, absolutely. All right, we are getting very close to the 3:30 hour, but I definitely want to kick it over to Jessica because I do want her to talk about SACAC membership. I know Mike and I were just kind of talking about some of the benefits of SACAC membership. But Jessica, some insight for us about why SACAC.
Sure. One of the benefits I would just say to both Amanda and Mike's point is that there's a lot of funding available for SACAC members to participate in lots of different professional development programs around the region and around the country. And so if you pay your $35 dues, which is pretty reasonable, there's a lot of funding available actually for you to go up to DC. And Amanda and Myra both benefited from that this year. We're always looking for new members. We're always looking for folks who want to get involved. And that's an easy way to do that. There's also opportunities to apply for grants for new programs. So if you're thinking about creating a program to benefit students in your district or in your high school or on your college campus, we have Extending the Dream grants that you can apply for. We also have counselor participation funding available for folks who want to attend our regional conference or NACAC's national conference. We have mini camp college programs for students to learn more about what to do during a college fair. Drive-in workshops are available for professionals. We also offer the Sunshine Tour every summer. We pick a different part of our 9-state region and offer college tours for college counselors and school counselors, and then also have training available for brand new admission folks as well. So lots of different ways to engage with SACAC. And we hope you'll take us up on that offer. Again, it's only $35 to join if you're not already a member, and we'd love to see you participate in some of our programming in the future.
Yeah. Awesome. All right. Thanks for that information, Jessica. Okay, so we're going to wrap up the webinar, but I want to direct you to some resources. So very quickly, we're going to pop on over to the SACAC website where this webinar and all of its attached resources will be made available. It looks like the resources will be up and available as early as tomorrow. So you're looking at the website right now, sacac.org/knowledge center. And then under webinars, and then we will be listed there. So you'll be able to click on the webinar and rewatch it because I know it was so much fun. But then you'll also be able to access all of the attached resources, things that John talked about, like the how to approach a staffer and step-by-step directions for how to get on the website and track bills, for example. The last thing that I want to do is I'm going to share my screen very, very quickly, and I just want to put up the bottom part of the agenda in case anyone has any questions that they want to reach out to any of the panelists today. Or if you are interested in joining Myra and myself and working as part of the committee for Florida, this is something brand new that we're trying to kick off. And again, we're looking at creating 3 committees, one in the north, one in the mid part of the state, and then one in the south, so that we can really start building a group of advocators, whether you're at K-12 or higher ed. So again, if you're interested, please don't hesitate to reach out to myself or Myra. If you have any questions or concerns or want more information about any of the bills that we talked about today, again, please don't hesitate to reach out to Myra or myself. And then Mike and Jessica have been so kind as to share their contact information as well. So please don't hesitate to reach out to them if you would like more information. Thank you all so much for joining us today. Sorry that we went 4 minutes over, but I really appreciate everyone who joined us. And we hope to hear from you. We hope that you join SACAC. We hope that you take part in joining our legislative committees. And other than that, I hope you all have a great rest of your Wednesday and a great rest of your week. Take care.